She had barely made it through the gate with her crying toddler in one arm and a diaper bag sliding off her shoulder. Her name was Emily, young, exhausted, and clearly trying her best. The baby, around 18 months old, was red-faced from crying, kicking gently in frustration as the last boarding call echoed through the terminal. Emily didn't meet anyone's eyes as she shuffled down the aisle, whispering soothing words to her son, just hoping they could make it through the flight without becoming that passenger. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Seat 14B. That was her assigned spot, right in the middle of the row, next to the window already occupied by a well-dressed older woman whose eyes widened in visible disapproval. Her designer sunglasses perched on top of her perfectly styled hair, and her lips thinned into a straight line as she watched Emily fumble with her bag. "You've got to be kidding me," the woman muttered loud enough for others to hear, though she didn't look directly at Emily. The people across the aisle exchanged glances. No one said anything, not yet. Emily gave an awkward smile, gently shifting the baby to her other arm as she tried to lift her carry-on into the overhead bin. The baby let out another loud wail. That's when the woman sighed, long and theatrical, then stood abruptly, blocking Emily's path. "This is ridiculous," the woman snapped. "I specifically requested no children in my row." Emily froze, confused. "I'm sorry. This is my assigned seat," she said softly, still trying to bounce her son to calm him. "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before bringing a baby on a crowded flight. Some of us paid for peace and quiet." The tension snapped into the cabin like a clap of thunder. Passengers started turning, subtly at first, then outright watching. Phones were subtly lifted. One man raised his eyebrows. A flight attendant, several rows up, noticed and began making her way over. Emily's face flushed, but she remained composed. "I'm just trying to get settled. I'll do my best to keep him quiet." "Oh, please," the woman said with a dry laugh. "You people always say that." "You people." The phrase hit Emily like a slap. It wasn't just about the baby. It was about her clothes, her appearance, her everything. The woman, whose name would soon be known to social media as Karen in seat 14A, turned her back deliberately and sat back down, arms crossed. The baby was now sobbing, louder than before, disturbed by the rising tension. Emily finally got her bag stowed, heart pounding in her ears, and slid into the middle seat. The Karen's elbow already occupied half the armrest. There was no apology, no effort to move. "Maybe next time you should drive," the woman muttered again, not even bothering to whisper. The flight attendant approached just as Emily was trying to buckle herself and her baby in. Her smile was tight, professional. "Ladies, is there a problem here?" Before Emily could answer, the woman launched into her version of events. "I paid for comfort, and now I'm squished next to a crying baby and a disorganized mother. Can I be moved? Or, better yet, can she be moved?" The attendant looked from Karen to Emily. Her gaze softened slightly when she met Emily's tired eyes. "We're completely full today. I'll see what I can do. But for now, everyone needs to be seated. We're about to push back from the gate." Emily nodded, blinking back tears. She didn't want a scene. She didn't want to be on TikTok. She just wanted to get home. The baby was finally starting to settle, clutching at the pacifier Emily had been frantically digging for in her bag. As the plane taxied out onto the runway, things calmed slightly, for about 3 minutes. That's when the baby coughed, and coughed again, a little too hard. The woman beside her immediately tensed and turned. "Is he sick?" "No," Emily said quickly. "He's just tired." "Well, I don't want to get sick. Can you put something over his face?" "He's a baby," Emily said, trying to stay calm. "I can't." "This is unsafe. I want to speak to the head attendant. Right now." Emily's heart sank. She could feel the other passengers' eyes again, some judging, some sympathetic. The man across the aisle gave her a faint nod, but no one stepped in. "Not yet." The woman pressed the call button repeatedly, like it was some kind of weapon. The baby began to whimper again. The pressure in the cabin shifted as the plane began its ascent, and Emily instinctively cradled her son, trying to help him pop his ears. He started crying louder. Karen threw up her hands. This is exactly what I didn't want. I demand to be moved now. The flight attendant returned, this time with the purser. Emily's throat was tight. She knew what it looked like. A mother failing to quiet her child. A complaining passenger. People starting to whisper. "Ma'am, we've asked you to remain calm," the purser said gently but firmly to the woman. "She's ruining this entire flight." The woman shot back. "I want a refund. I want her reported. I want her off this plane." Emily looked up in shock. "What?" The purser remained calm. "That's not how this works, ma'am. The mother and her child have every right to fly." The baby, as if sensing the climax of the moment, stopped crying. A complete hush fell over the area. Karen looked stunned, furious, defeated, but not yet done. Emily turned, lips pressed together. She whispered, "I just want to get home. Please." The purser nodded. "We understand. If there's any more trouble, just let us know." The woman beside her scoffed and looked out the window, but the damage had been done. Whispers buzzed like static. Phones were still recording, discreetly or not. But something shifted after that moment. Something unexpected. Because just when Emily thought it couldn't get any worse, something happened halfway through the flight. Something that would turn this awkward encounter into a story that millions would soon be talking about online. And it started not with Karen's next outburst, but with the baby doing something no one saw coming. The cabin lights dimmed as the flight moved into cruising altitude. The gentle hum of the engines was broken only by the occasional ding of the seatbelt sign, or the hushed voices of passengers chatting quietly. Emily sat stiffly in her seat, clutching her son, hoping for a moment of peace. Her mind was spinning, not just from the tension with the woman beside her, but from everything that had led her to this moment. A solo flight with a toddler was never part of the plan, but sometimes life forces your hand. Her son, Noah, finally calm enough to rest his head against her chest. His little hand gripped her shirt tightly, his breath evening out. For the first time since boarding, Emily allowed herself to take a breath. She glanced out the window, only to be met with the sharp side eye of the woman next to her. Karen, as she would later be known online, shifted her scarf dramatically and reached for her designer purse. She pulled out a scented handkerchief and pressed it to her nose, as if sharing air with a child was offensive. Emily didn't react. She couldn't afford to. She was used to looks like that. Ever since Noah was born, she felt a silent judgment wherever she went, restaurants, grocery stores, even parks. Being a single mother in public sometimes felt like carrying a sign that said, "Judge me." But what no one on the plane knew, not even flight attendants, was that this wasn't just a random flight. Emily wasn't just traveling for vacation or visiting family. She was running from something or someone. She had booked the flight last minute, paid with what was left on her credit card, and boarded without telling anyone where she was going. The only clue she left behind was a note taped to the inside of her apartment door that said, "Don't come looking. We're safe now." She hadn't even told her sister. Not after what happened 2 nights ago. As she gently rocked Noah in her arms, her thoughts flickered back to that moment. Standing in her tiny kitchen, the lights off, Noah asleep in his crib, and the knock at the door. Slow, heavy, persistent. She didn't answer. She didn't move. She just stood there, heart pounding, breath held, while the knocking continued and then stopped. But the next morning, she found footprints in the hallway, muddy ones. Someone had waited, watched. Emily had always felt like someone was watching, ever since the day Noah's father disappeared without explanation. He wasn't just gone, he had vanished. No goodbye, no messages, just gone. Then strange things started happening. Calls from blocked numbers. A black SUV parked outside her apartment for hours. A man standing across the street who never blinked. She tried to ignore it, tried to live a normal life. But that knock 2 nights ago, that was her breaking point. She wasn't paranoid. At least, she didn't think so. Now, 30,000 feet in the air, beside a woman who had done nothing but make things harder, Emily found herself doubting again. Was she overreacting? Was she imagining all of it? Or had someone really followed her to the airport? Noah stirred. Emily pulled a small stuffed elephant from her bag and handed it to him. He gave a sleepy smile, clutched it tight, and snuggled into her. Karen groaned under her breath. "Wonderful," she mumbled. "Toys." Emily stared forward, trying to stay calm. She wouldn't give this woman the satisfaction of breaking down. Not here. Not now. But then it happened. A soft beep came from the panel above. Nothing unusual, just the overhead light. Except it wasn't her light. It was Karen's. Karen looked up, annoyed. "I didn't press that." Emily didn't say anything. She was about to press the button to turn it off when Karen slapped her hand away. "Don't touch my side," she snapped. Emily blinked, stunned. "I was just trying to." "You people always touch things," Karen hissed. "Just keep your hands to yourself." Emily's heart raced. Her throat tightened. She wanted to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The flight attendant, now 2 rows back, glanced over again, sensing something. But before anything else could be said, Noah did something strange. He sat up slowly, his little eyes still half shut with sleep. And then he looked, not at Emily and not at Karen, but directly across the aisle, staring at a man in a gray hoodie. Seated alone, his face hidden beneath the raised hood. Noah tilted his head and said in a small, uncertain voice, "Da-da." Emily froze. Karen let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, lovely. Can't even keep track of who the father is." But Emily didn't hear her. She was staring at the man. She hadn't noticed him bored. She didn't remember seeing him during takeoff. Something about him sent a chill down her spine. She turned to her son. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Noah pointed again. "Da." The man didn't move, didn't look up. He just sat there motionless. Emily tried to get a better look, but the lighting made it difficult. She could barely make out his face. Something about the shape of his jaw, though, it did feel familiar. Karen leaned over mockingly. Maybe the child just saw someone who looks like his daddy. Kids get confused, though I'm not surprised you don't know who that is. Emily ignored her. Her pulse was racing now. Her palms were damp. Was it possible? No, it couldn't be. Noah's father was gone. Completely gone. But what if someone had been watching them all this time, because he wasn't missing? What if he had never left at all? She took a shaky breath and glanced again. The man hadn't moved an inch, not even to sip water. He didn't even have a drink. Emily whispered to her son, "Baby, are you sure?" Noah nodded once and hugged his elephant tighter. Emily debated pressing the call button, but what would she even say? That her toddler recognized a man on the plane? That someone might be following her? She knew how it would sound. She knew Karen would have a field day. And yet, the sense of dread grew. She reached into her bag and subtly pulled out her phone. No signal, of course. They were still mid-flight. But she opened the camera anyway and quietly aimed it across the aisle. If nothing else, she'd review it later. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. But just as she adjusted the angle to get a clear shot, the man turned his head, only slightly, just enough to make eye contact with her. His eyes, dark, cold, met hers for less than a second, but it was enough. Emily dropped the phone. Her blood ran cold. The man smiled, just slightly, and then turned away. Karen noticed Emily's reaction and smirked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Emily didn't respond, because for the first time since getting on this plane, she wasn't just worried about her son crying. She was scared they might not get off this plane safely at all. Emily sat frozen in her seat, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the soft murmur of the passengers around her. She kept her eyes locked on the man across the aisle, though he now faced forward again, completely still. He hadn't spoken a word. He hadn't even blinked when their eyes met. But there was something about his expression, just a flicker of recognition in his smirk, that made her stomach twist. Noah had drifted back to sleep, resting quietly against her chest, unaware of the storm unraveling inside his mother. Emily could feel the heat of Karen's judgmental stare still burning into her, but at this point it didn't matter. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and she had no idea what to do about it, while trapped inside a metal tube at 30,000 feet. She turned slightly in her seat, pretending to stretch, and glanced behind her. A man with headphones nodded to the beat of whatever he was listening to. A young woman tapped away on her laptop. No one seemed to notice anything strange. No one else seemed disturbed by the man in the hoodie. Emily needed help, but she couldn't risk causing panic, or worse, looking unstable. She'd already felt the weight of people's assumptions the moment she boarded the plane with a crying toddler. If she stood up now and told the flight attendants that she thought someone might be following her, they might ask her to sit down and calm herself. Or worse, remove her when they landed for causing a disturbance. She bit her lip and looked down at Noah's tiny fingers curled around her shirt. She had to be smart. She had to stay focused. The man hadn't made a move. He hadn't said anything threatening. But the way Noah had recognized him, without ever having seen a photo of his father, chilled her. But what if it was him? Emily had never shared pictures of Noah publicly. She barely used social media at all. But that didn't mean someone hadn't been watching from afar. She couldn't forget the note she'd found weeks ago on her windshield, one that simply read, "He deserves to know the truth." She'd thrown it away, brushed it off as a prank. Now, she wasn't so sure. A sudden movement beside her made her jump. Karen had pulled out her tablet and started typing furiously. Her fingers tapped against the glass with dramatic annoyance. "I'll be writing a complaint about this flight," Karen muttered. Absolutely disgraceful. No control over passengers. Screaming child. Unstable mother. And now apparently we got a creepy man lurking nearby. Emily turned sharply. "What did you just say?" Karen didn't even flinch. "Don't think I didn't notice. I saw the way you dropped your phone. The way you keep watching him. You look paranoid." Emily's eyes narrowed. "You noticed him?" Karen finally looked at her directly. "Of course I did. But unlike you, I'm not going to cause a scene midair. If he's making you uncomfortable, say something. Don't just sit here looking terrified." Emily glanced back across the aisle. The man was gone. Her chest tightened. She blinked rapidly and leaned forward, craning her neck. Seat 15C was empty. She gasped softly. He was just there. Karen raised an eyebrow. "You got to be kidding me." Emily's hands trembled. He was sitting right there, hoodie, dark eyes. He was watching me. Karen sighed and pressed her call button again, muttering something under her breath. A flight attendant appeared moments later, cheerful but clearly tired from handling Karen earlier. "Is there a problem again?" the attendant asked. Karen answered first. "Yes. Apparently this woman is seeing ghosts now." Emily jumped in. "No, please listen. There was a man in seat 15C. He was there just a moment ago. Now he's gone. Could you check the manifest? I need to know if he's even supposed to be on this flight." The attendant frowned slightly. "We can't give out passenger information, ma'am." Emily lowered her voice. "I think he's following me. Please, just check if that seat's occupied." The attendant looked torn. "I can ask one of the crew to check during our next cabin sweep. For now, try to stay calm, okay? We'll be landing in just over 2 hours." Emily nodded slowly. "Okay, thank you." The flight attendant moved on. Karen rolled her eyes. "You're lucky they haven't kicked you off this plane yet." But Emily wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes were darting around the cabin, scanning every aisle, every row. Where had he gone? She didn't see him in the front. Had he moved to the back? Or worse, was he in the lavatory waiting for the right moment? She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Elsewhere on the plane, the man in the hoodie now sat quietly in the last row, barely visible. He hadn't said a word the entire flight, hadn't ordered a drink or spoken to anyone, but he never took his eyes off the woman in 14B. His hand rested on the carry-on bag tucked beneath the seat in front of him. Inside it, a small plastic case sat quietly, its contents unknown. Meanwhile, in first class, a separate but connected tension was brewing. A middle-aged man in a business suit scrolled through photos on his phone, occasionally pausing on one of Emily and Noah taken at a park. His face remained blank, but his grip on the phone tightened every time the boy's face appeared. He had boarded early, unnoticed, and sat with a champagne glass he hadn't touched. A short message glowed at the top of his phone screen. "They're on board. Back row watching. Wait for signal." 2 hours from landing, and the plane was carrying more than just passengers. Emily tried to distract herself. She opened her phone again and began scrolling through photos of Noah, anything to stay grounded. But every image just reminded her of how unprepared she was, how she had no idea what she was up against. She had left behind everything, her job, her apartment, her friends, because of a growing sense that someone or someones were closing in. She had hoped the flight would offer escape, but now it felt like a trap in the sky. Her only plan was to get off the plane and disappear again. But if the man watching her was already here, was it too late? Karen, despite her earlier theatrics, had gone strangely quiet. She watched Emily now with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "So, what did you do?" she asked finally. "Why would someone follow you?" Emily hesitated. She could have lied, could have shrugged it off. But something told her that the question was more loaded than it appeared. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I think someone doesn't want me or my son to tell the truth." Karen tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. What truth? Emily looked up, eyes sharp now despite her exhaustion. That his father didn't just walk away. That maybe he was taken. Karen blinked, taken aback. "Are you saying?" But before Emily could answer, the cabin lights flickered. Just once. And the captain's voice came on over the speaker. But the tone was strange, shaky. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and buckle up." Karen leaned over. "This plane better not go down. I swear, if this turns into one of those stories." Emily didn't respond. She was already staring at the back of the plane again. The man in the hoodie was no longer in his seat. And this time, he wasn't alone. The cabin lights flickered again, just once, but this time they stayed a little dimmer than before. A strange hush fell over the plane, the kind of silence that felt thick, heavy, like everyone was waiting for something, even if they didn't know what. Emily sat upright, gripping the armrest as her mind raced. She didn't know where the man in the hoodie had gone, and now he wasn't alone. Her eyes scanned the cabin, trying to remain calm while every instinct inside her screamed. She glanced at the back of the plane, but all she could see was a narrow aisle and a few passengers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Nothing obvious, nothing that confirmed her fear. But something wasn't right. She felt it deep in her chest. Karen suddenly reached for the call button again, her voice sharp. "I'm not waiting for something bad to happen. I want someone to check the rear of this plane. I don't care if it's unusual turbulence. I've been on enough flights to know when something's off." Before Emily could say anything, the same flight attendant approached. Her smile was still forced, but now her eyes had a flicker of unease. "Is there another issue, ma'am?" Karen leaned in, lowering her voice slightly. "Yes, there's a man who's been moving around the plane, unaccounted for. This woman says he was watching her, and now the lights are flickering, and he's disappeared again." The attendant glanced at Emily. "Is this true?" Emily nodded, her voice low but steady. "He was in row 15. Then the back. Now, I don't know, and I swear he's not alone anymore." The flight attendant paused. "Okay, I'll inform the purser." She turned and walked away quickly, heading toward the cockpit. Karen folded her arms. "If this turns into some kind of hostage situation, I knew it. You can always tell when something's wrong with people." Emily ignored her. Her focus was now on protecting Noah, who had stirred again, restless but not yet awake. She adjusted his blanket and tried to breathe. Her heart thudded in her ears, louder than the hum of the engines. The worst part was not knowing who the man was, not knowing what he wanted, not knowing if this was all just a sick coincidence or something far more dangerous. A few rows ahead, someone coughed. Loud, wet. People started glancing around again. There was a rising edge of tension in the air now. Nothing said outright, but every movement felt sharper, more alert. The cockpit door opened slightly, and the purser stepped out with a calm but serious look. She walked toward the back of the plane, speaking quietly into a small radio clipped to her blouse. One of the male flight attendants followed her a moment later. Karen leaned toward Emily. "You said this had to do with your son's father. So who is he?" "Someone dangerous." Emily didn't answer right away. How could she explain it? How could she tell a stranger that the man she once loved had vanished, only to possibly return now like a shadow at 30,000 feet? She didn't even know if it was him. But if it was, then everything she'd feared was real. The following, the notes, the black SUV, all of it. Emily looked Karen in the eyes. I don't know who he is anymore. Karen stared at her for a long second, then said something Emily never expected. Well, if something happens, I've got pepper spray in my bag. Emily blinked, surprised. Seriously? Karen gave a tight nod. You learn to travel smart when you've dealt with enough weirdos. For a brief second, they shared something like understanding. Then the voice over the speaker returned, this time not the pilot. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your purser speaking. For your safety, we're asking all passengers to remain seated with seatbelts fastened. We're currently addressing a small concern in the back of the cabin. Please remain calm. We appreciate your cooperation. The unease now became a low hum, buzzing between seats. People whispered. A baby in row 20 began to cry. The man in the suit up front, Emily hadn't seen him move the entire flight, was now slowly tucking his phone away and standing. Emily noticed immediately. She watched him turn, glance briefly down the aisle, and start walking slowly toward the rear of the plane. No one stopped him. The attendants were still in the back. The cabin lights flickered again. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. He's not a passenger. Karen's head turned. What? That man in the suit. He's not supposed to be here. Karen followed her gaze. He was sitting in first class the whole flight, wasn't he? Emily shook her head. I saw him with photos. Photos of us. Karen's face changed. You're serious. Emily didn't speak. The man in the suit had passed row 20 now and was nearing the last section. The passengers around him sat still, watching but unsure. Nothing had been confirmed. Nothing had happened, but it felt like it would. Just as he reached the rear, the curtain separating economy from the galley swayed slightly. And then he stopped. He turned around, slowly, and his eyes scanned the cabin, pausing for a breath too long. When they landed on Emily, she looked down instantly, heart racing. Noah whimpered, waking more fully now. His eyes blinked open, confused by the tension around him. Then someone screamed. A loud, piercing sound from the back of the plane. Every head turned. The flight attendants rushed forward again, but this time one of them shouted, "Stay in your seats." Emily's entire body went rigid. She could see nothing, just a flickering glimpse of shadows through the swaying curtain. More movement. A second scream. A tray clattered to the floor. Karen pulled her bag onto her lap, unzipping it with shaky hands. "Get ready," she muttered. Emily could hardly breathe. "What's happening?" "I don't know," Karen whispered. "But it's not just your past anymore. Something else is going on here." Another voice came over the speaker, this time shaky, not professional. "This is a captain. We need all flight attendants to the front immediately. We've been notified of a possible security threat on board. I repeat, remain in your seats." Emily's grip on Noah tightened as her gaze darted between the man in the suit, who had now frozen mid-aisle, and the rear curtain, where no one had emerged. The baby across the aisle cried louder now. Emily's eyes were filled with panic, but deep down, something else. Something sharper. She had felt afraid for weeks, but this was something more. This was real, and the time to run was over. Her eyes locked with Karen's. "If anything happens," Emily began. Karen nodded. "You'll protect the boy. I'll watch your back." And just then, the curtain at the back was yanked aside, and what stepped out wasn't what anyone expected. The curtain flew open with a sharp swish, and the entire cabin held its breath. Every eye turned toward the back of the plane. But instead of a threat, no mass intruder, no weapons, no chaos, there was a flight attendant who stepped out. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her face pale, and her voice trembling as she grabbed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," she said shakily. "We're currently investigating a situation. There is no immediate danger. Please stay seated." But the fear in her eyes told a different story. Emily leaned into the aisle, heart-hammering. The man in the hoodie was no longer in the rear. He had vanished again. Karen whispered beside her, "They're covering something up." Emily didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the man in the suit, who was now standing completely still, facing front of the plane again. It was like something had frozen him mid-step. His demeanor had shifted. No longer calm. No longer in control. Something had changed. Then a voice came from behind them, not over the speaker, not from the attendants, but low, male, steady. "I need to speak with the mother and the child." Emily turned slowly, and there he was, the man in the hoodie. But now he had pulled it down. His face was fully visible, and it was him, Noah's father, David. She hadn't seen him in almost 2 years, not since the day he left without warning. Her mouth went dry, her entire body locked in place. There was no mistaking him. Same eyes, same jawline, just a little older, more tired. But it was him, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, 2 other men stood, dressed like passengers, but wrong somehow. Too alert, too coordinated. One of them wore a small earpiece, almost hidden. The other clutched something under his jacket. Whatever was happening, this wasn't just about David coming back. This was something deeper, more dangerous. Karen saw them too and tensed immediately. "You know him?" Emily's voice cracked. "That's Noah's father." Karen didn't blink. "He doesn't look like he came back for a visit." David raised his hands, slightly, signaling calm. "Emily, I need you to trust me. Don't panic. Don't scream. Just listen." Emily stood slowly, shielding Noah behind her. "You left us. You disappeared. What are you doing here?" David's eyes darted briefly toward the front of the plane, toward the man in the suit, before returning to hers. "I didn't disappear," he said. "I was taken, and now they're trying to take him." Emily felt the floor tilt beneath her, even though the plane was still. "What are you talking about?" David took a cautious step forward. "He's not who he says he is. The man in first class. He's not a passenger. He works for them." "Them?" Karen echoed. David nodded. "The same group that found out about Noah, about what he can do." Emily stared at him, stunned. "He's just a child." David's voice was firm. "No, he's not just a child." A murmur rippled through the nearby rows. People were now clearly paying attention. Some stood slightly. A few phones had begun recording. The tension was turning from quiet panic into full-blown alarm. David kept his hands raised. "I know how it sounds, but I need to get both of you off this plane safely. They're going to try to take him when we land. That man up front, he's not flying for business. He's here for our son." Emily's head spun. None of this made sense. And yet somehow it did. The watching, the tracking, the messages, the SUV, all of it. She had just never dared to believe it was part of something this big. "What does he want with Noah?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David hesitated. "They think he's special. He passed tests they weren't supposed to run. I found out too late. When I tried to protect him, they made me disappear. I've been trying to find a way back ever since." Karen blinked hard. "Okay, this is way beyond a baby crying on a plane." The 2 men behind David stepped closer now, scanning the cabin. One leaned in and whispered something in David's ear. He nodded. "They know we're moving," he said quickly. "We don't have much time. I need you to trust me." Emily didn't move. "How do I know you're not one of them?" He took something from his jacket, a small worn photograph. It was old, a little bent, but unmistakable. Emily and baby Noah, the day they brought him home from the hospital. The picture had never been posted anywhere. It had only ever been in her nightstand. David's voice cracked. "I carried this with me every day, even when I didn't know if I'd ever see you again." Emily felt her guard weaken, just for a moment, and then chaos. The man in the suit suddenly lunged forward, pushing a flight attendant aside as he reached into his inner coat. Screams erupted. Passengers ducked. Phones dropped. Someone shouted for help. David moved instantly, throwing himself forward, tackling the man in the aisle. The two crashed to the floor between rows, knocking over drinks and trays. One of David's men followed, pulling something from his belt, some kind of signal jammer. He flipped it on and the cabin lights flickered again. Karen yanked Emily down into her seat. "Stay down." Noah began crying, confused and scared by the noise, the shouting, the sudden burst of action. Emily crouched low, shielding him. As David wrestled the man in the suit for control of the bag, he had pulled from under the seat. Then the pilot's voice shouted through the intercom, "Panic now. Security breach on board. All passengers stay seated. We're making an emergency landing." The plane began to tilt slightly as the engines roared louder. Masks dropped. People screamed. Chaos everywhere. David looked up at Emily from the floor, eyes pleading. "You have to choose now," he shouted. "Come with me, or lose him forever." Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he burst into the clearing. The flashlight beam trembled in his hand, swinging across the trees, then finally settling on the silhouette he feared he'd never see again, Lila, standing barefoot in the center of the clearing, her arms wrapped tightly around Bruno's thick neck. The bear wasn't growling. He wasn't even moving. He was shielding her. Daniel barely managed to whisper, "Lila." She turned slowly, her eyes wide but not with fear. Something deeper, something confused and oddly calm. "He didn't hurt me," she said quietly. "He saved me." At that moment, Sheriff Klein emerged behind Daniel, panting and holding his pistol low. "Get back, Daniel. Step away from the girl." His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "No," Daniel said quickly. "Don't shoot. Look at her. Look at Bruno." The bear, massive and scarred, locked eyes with Klein but didn't move. It was as if he understood what was happening, and he was waiting. Then, from the shadows, another figure stepped forward. Everyone froze. It was a stranger from the woods, the same man Daniel had caught glimpses of before. He was older, grizzled, wearing a dark flannel jacket and a worn cap. His eyes were hard but familiar, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, two more men emerged, dragging something heavy behind them, a large, black duffel bag that thudded as it hit the dirt. "What's in the bag?" Sheriff Klein demanded, his gun still raised. The older man gave a crooked smile. "Proof," he said simply. Lila backed away slightly, her fingers tightening in Bruno's fur. The bear let out a soft huff, but remained still. "I know who you are," Daniel said slowly, his voice shaking. "You're the tracker, the one from the news articles, the man who disappeared 10 years ago." The stranger tilted his head. "Not disappeared. Hiding. Watching. Because I knew someday they'd come back here." Klein lowered his weapon slightly, confused. "Who?" The man pointed at the duffel bag. One of his companions unzipped it. Inside were tools, snares, tranquilizers, collars with embedded chips, a tablet, and a folder marked Project Echo. Daniel's stomach twisted as he stepped closer and looked. Inside the folder were documents, maps, animal logs, and photos. One of Bruno, locked in a cage, bloodied. Another of the pups. And at the very bottom, a photo of Daniel's old friend, Ray. Daniel's knees gave slightly. Ray knew about this. "He helped me shut it down," the stranger said. "We burned half the site, but we didn't catch them all." "And now they're back?" Daniel asked. "They never left," the man said grimly. "They just got quieter." Klein looked at the bear. "So you're saying Bruno, he's one of theirs?" "He escaped," the stranger nodded. "But they always wanted him back. That's why your fences were cut. That's why the drones came. They don't just want him. They want what he remembers, what he knows." Lila whispered, "They tried to take me too." Everyone turned. She trembled, stepping forward slowly. "They were in the woods. I heard them talking. They didn't know I was there. They said something about a test, about needing Bruno to react." Daniel's fist clenched. The realization hit him hard. They were using her. Lila was bait. The tracker nodded. And it worked. Bruno suddenly shifted, growling low, his gaze fixed on something deeper in the forest. The hair on Daniel's neck rose. The stranger spun, raising his arm. "Get down." Gunfire split the night. Muzzle flashes burst from the trees. Daniel tackled Lila to the ground, shielding her. Klein returned fire as the other two men dove for cover. Bruno roared and charged the direction of the shots. Chaos exploded in the clearing. The darkness lit up in flashes. Bruno's growls echoed like thunder through the trees. Then silence. Deep, awful silence. When Daniel looked up, the attackers were gone. The stranger and his team moved quickly, checking the woods, but found no one. Only a few shell casings and tire tracks leading away from the road behind the ridge. Bruno returned minutes later, limping but alive. He lay down near Lila and rested his massive head in her lap, his breathing heavy but calm. It was over, or so it seemed. Back at the cabin, Daniel sat beside Lila while Klein spoke quietly with the tracker outside. The fire crackled, and Bruno lay by the door like a guardian. Lila finally broke the silence. "You believe me now?" Daniel nodded. "I never should have doubted you. But they're still out there," she said, "and they'll come back." Daniel looked at her, then at Bruno, and then through the dark window to the woods beyond. "They might," he said, "but next time we'll be ready." Just as the words left his mouth, there was a faint knock at the door. Daniel froze. He walked over slowly and opened it just a crack. Standing on the porch, soaked in rain and barely standing, was a woman. She looked familiar, but it took Daniel a moment to recognize her. It was Lila's mother. Only something was wrong. Her eyes were wide, panicked, and filled with dread. She reached out and grabbed Daniel's arm. "They're not after the bear," she whispered. "They're after her." Behind her, headlights flickered deep in the woods. And the night, once again, was no longer safe. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Daniel held Lila tightly, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder as the truth settled like dust around them. The storm outside had finally cleared, but the one inside the house was only now beginning to settle. Vincent Kingsley sat still in his chair, staring at his daughter, not as a tech mogul or a powerful man, but simply as a father who had lost time and perhaps trust with the one person he thought he protected all his life. Lila didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her voice, calm and steady, was the only sound in the room. "I didn't want to hate you, Dad. I just didn't know if you were the man I remembered or the one they said you were." Daniel looked between them, the pieces finally fitting together. He understood now that what brought Lila into his life wasn't just fear. It was a hope that someone, somewhere, could see her without judgment. He had been that person, even if he hadn't meant to be. Vincent slowly stood and walked toward them. "I never meant to lose you," he said. "But I see now I wasn't looking in the right places, and I wasn't listening to what really mattered." Lila nodded slightly, not ready to forgive, but no longer running. "I'm still figuring things out," she whispered. Daniel stepped back, giving them space. The living room that once felt like a battlefield now seemed strangely quiet, filled with a sense of fragile peace. In the days that followed, life didn't return to normal. It changed entirely. Vincent didn't try to whisk Lila away in a jet or hide her behind security gates. Instead, he rented a small apartment nearby, promising to stay close but let her move at her own pace. He started attending therapy with her, something he once scoffed at. It wasn't about image anymore. It was about healing. Daniel, on the other hand, returned to the routines that kept him grounded. Early breakfast with Ben, school drop-offs, evening walks through the park. But everything felt different. There was a warmth in the house that hadn't been there before. Lila, though still guarded, started opening up to Ben, helping with homework, telling stories from her own childhood. Sometimes she'd trail off mid-sentence, but Ben never pressed. He just listened, and she appreciated that more than he knew. There was one night, a few weeks later, when Daniel stood out on the porch, watching the stars. Lila came out quietly, wrapping a blanket around herself. "I think I'm going to stay," she said. Daniel looked over, surprised. "You sure?" She nodded. "I used to think running was strength, but staying, facing things, that's harder. You taught me that." He smiled, unsure what to say. For all the chaos that had entered his life when she showed up, he wouldn't trade it. Not for anything. But there was one more thread left hanging. Detective Moore showed up again, not in a suit this time, but in jeans and a windbreaker. He looked tired but less tense. "We've got the men who were following her," he said. Turns out they weren't working for Vincent at all. They were former employees of that security firm, off-the-books guys. Someone else paid them. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Who?" Moore hesitated. Vincent's former business partner, a man named Ellis Carr. He was trying to leverage Lila's disappearance to gain control of Vincent's company. Daniel blinked. He was using her as a weapon? Not directly, Moore said. But he knew what would happen if people thought Vincent couldn't protect his daughter. That kind of scandal shakes investor confidence. He just didn't expect her to end up with, well, someone like you. Daniel exhaled sharply, still trying to absorb it. So it wasn't just about money. Moore nodded. It never is. The news made Lila quiet for a few days. She walked more, alone, through the park or around the block, thinking. But eventually, she came back with a sense of peace. "I was angry at the wrong people," she told Daniel one morning, stirring sugar into her tea. "It wasn't my father who made me feel unsafe. It was the world he built and the people he trusted. But he's tearing that down now, piece by piece." The final chapter came months later, when Vincent invited Daniel and Ben to a small event. No media, no flash. Just a dinner with people who mattered. He stood before them, holding Lila's hand gently, and announced that the company was being restructured. The old board had been dissolved. Carr had been publicly removed. A new foundation, run by Lila and dedicated to supporting runaway youth, would receive a portion of the profits. Daniel watched her speak to the crowd, calm and assured, and couldn't believe this was the same girl who once hid in his garage with nothing but a backpack and fear in her eyes. Later that night, as they drove home, Ben leaned over in the back seat. "Is she going to be famous now?" Daniel laughed. "Maybe, but not for being rich, for being brave." Ben nodded. "She's kind of like a superhero." Lila, sitting in the front seat, smiled, only without the cape. The car was filled with quiet laughter, the kind that comes from people who've lived through something hard and come out stronger on the other side. By the time autumn rolled around, the trees had begun to shed their leaves, and so had Daniel. All the grief and loneliness he carried after losing his wife had found a place to soften. It didn't disappear, but it no longer weighed him down. Lila's presence had changed his life, not just by what she brought, but by what she helped him let go of. She wasn't a daughter by blood, but he felt the same pride, the same worry, and the same fierce protectiveness as any father would. And Lila, once adrift in the world, had finally found a home where love didn't come with conditions. There was one final morning where Daniel walked into the kitchen to find Lila cooking breakfast, something she swore she couldn't do. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure that's edible?" She grinned. "Nope, but Ben's hungry and I'm trying." He laughed and joined her, taking over the eggs before she could burn them. And for a while, it was just quiet, just family. What started as a desperate knock on a stranger's door had become something more, something real, something permanent. In the end, it wasn't money or status or DNA that made a family. It was choice. It was showing up again and again, even when it was hard. And sometimes, just sometimes, it was about opening your door to a stranger and finding your entire life change in the most unexpected, beautiful way.